Hey, it's Trent over here at Whip Around, where we keep the world's fleets moving. This video is all about the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, or the CVSA. Today we'll go over why the CVSA is an important and independent body, where they sit between the regulators like the DOT and the FMCSA, how they establish the framework for compliance to be enforced, as well as lobbying for policy change on behalf of the industry. Ultimately, their purpose is to improve the safety of the roads across the US, Canada, and Mexico. Our guest here is Chris Turner, who is a lawyer within the CVSA and is heavily involved within their efforts. Certainly the best person to explain what this is all about. So this video is a bit long because we do dig into some detail here. So at any point you can actually adjust the speed of the video by going down to the right-hand corner of the video player, clicking on the settings button and adjusting your playback speed. And lastly, we want to hear from you throughout this video. So if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, make sure to put them in the comments section below the video, and we'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Here is Chris Turner discussing the CVSA.
Now we will jump into who CVSA is. And this is a pretty common thing we get. CVSA oftentimes is confused as being a part of FMCSA or that we're somehow regulators, and we're not. So CVSA, and you can see what it is up there, but I'm really just going to speak. You guys can read the slides. So we are a nonprofit, and our membership, kind of the first tier of our membership throughout Canada, the US, and Mexico are enforcement jurisdictions throughout all of North America, like I just mentioned. But of course, and you'll see it on a slide here in a minute, just as critical to our membership are associate members, and whether that's folks like Whip Around or Scopolitas or trucking companies and others, we could not accomplish our mission and our goals without the cooperation of all of these groups. We're talking about regulations, and we're talking about trucking components, and we're talking about data, and there's so many different moving parts. I guess kind of pardon the pun when we're talking about the trucking industry. That it really takes a dedicated group of people to make all of this work. So we appreciate all of the cooperation. And you can see there what our goal is, to achieve uniformity and compatibility and reciprocity of commercial vehicle inspections. The inspection you get in Kansas, which is where I'm located at now, should be the same primarily as you get in any other state. It should be also very similar to what you receive in Canada, even though the regulations are slightly different, and also similar to what you see in Mexico as well. But certainly in the States, it should be very, very similar, maybe with a few differences regionally, just based on terrain or where they have to stop the vehicle. But the inspection itself should be very similar. Let's talk about our charter and vision and mission. Again, you can see it up there and who our organizational memberships are. We have federal, state, provincial government agencies, representatives from all of North America, the US, Canada, and Mexico, and all dedicated to the improvement of commercial motor vehicle safety. One fatality is too many, one crash is too many, and we're always working to eliminate those crashes while furthering the interests of industry at the same time. When it talks about our vision to be recognized as the leader in commercial motor vehicle safety enforcement throughout the US, I firmly believe that we are. I think we have met that vision, and we want to maintain that and continue to do our very best to lead from the front every day. And then, as we talk about our mission, the same thing that I talked about before, the uniformity throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico, and we're always working toward that. And really, road check is one of those areas where we certainly move toward a more uniform data collection mechanism. It's interesting. CVSA does this on a grant sponsored with FMCSA. And the interesting thing about that, and one of the questions I usually get asked, is why doesn't FMCSA just do this themselves? Well, FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, who promulgates the regulations, they're a group within the United States Department of Transportation. They don't have any real reach into Canada and Mexico as far as data collection, right? Because they're a US government entity. However, because all of Canada's territories and provinces are members of CVSA as well as Mexico, that's where CVSA comes in, and we can bring these groups together in a way that a government agency can't, so we can really facilitate that information and data sharing. Talk briefly about our membership. You can see we have our principal agencies there, and that is FMCSA, FHWA, that's Federal Highway, PHMSA, FMCSA is responsible for the transportation of hazardous materials, NHTSA, and the rest as well. In Canada, Transport Canada and CCMTA, and then in Mexico, SCT and the federal police. And then you can see, we talk about Congress and government affairs and legislative activity and testifying hearings. Those are some of the things that CVSA does. But most importantly, what I want to focus on here is that industry has a seat at the table. And whether it's road check or any of other initiatives that CVSA has, especially our out of service criteria, 37-step inspection procedure, as I mentioned earlier, none of that was developed in a vacuum. I'm just a kind of an old cop, and my dad was a cop, and I knew a few things about vehicles and I could change the oil, but when somebody asked me to get underneath the truck and look at brake lining or push rod travel for the first time, I thought, what in the world is this? This is not what I thought I was signing up for, to be a police officer. But it turns out, it's really critical. It's one of the most critical things that officers do in the US anyway, is make sure that goods are being transported safely with commercial motor vehicles and interstate commerce. So without having, go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, Chris, just to pick up on that, since there's a lot of industry folks on the call today, how does their voice get heard in CVSA? How can they participate? What types of, how is their voice considered by the organization?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Let's just take the vehicle committee as the example, because I was talking about me being under a truck and going, what's this? So when we talk about those parts and components, whether we're talking about, let's say there, it might be the issue of a manufacturer, right? And they explain to us how those components work when they come to a CVSA meeting. So you can come to a CVSA meeting. You can also be part of our associates membership through our website, which I'll show you a little bit later, and submit issue request. And an issue request just says, hey, CVSA, we have something going on in the industry that we want you to take a look at. Maybe it's a brake component, like I just started to mention with vehicles, and we have to rely on those manufacturers. Maybe though, it is an hours of service issue. Take personal conveyance as an example. Personal conveyance, which I know is kind of a hot topic sometimes, but one of the things that personal conveyance really helped with is detention time when you were stuck at a facility and you were laden, because before that change, you couldn't move a laden vehicle, and then you couldn't get somewhere safe where you could rest and you had food and you had somewhere you get a shower, maybe a hotel room, or at least somewhere to park safely without violating your hours of service. And that came about really at the prompting of industry coming to CVSA meetings. So industry comes to the CVSA meetings or is active through CVSA's site through those issue requests. Or when you come to a meeting, industry also has a vote at the table. So they have their own associates group, and then they get to come to our region meetings, and CVSA is broken up into 5 regions. So they go to the appropriate region. They can really go to any region, but typically they go to the region that they're in so they can get to know those folks. And then they can get a voting card as well and vote in each of the committees we have. And I've got a slide talking about what those committees are coming up. But even if they don't have a vote, one of the things we pride ourselves on at CVSA is making sure everyone in the room, whether it's the meeting of the board of directors or any meeting we have, as we're figuring out the out of service criteria or inspection procedures, is that we want to hear from folks. So anybody in those meetings can stand up and use their active voice and talk and participate and share their experiences and their thoughts and their expertise. And we respect all of those opinions as they come in. Did that answer it? Did I get to it?
No, it's perfect.
Okay. Well, if you've got any more to add, please jump in. Obviously.
Oh, I've got plenty.
You've got a wealth of experience too. So I want you to jump in whenever you like. All right, show you our membership. And, Steve, in part for certain, when he was the executive director, definitely grew our class 3 associate members. There's only so many states. We're only going to have so many state class 1 members. We are trying to grow our locals. Locals are actually the police departments and sheriff's departments who work underneath that 71 number for the class 1 state and provincial memberships. 20 is our federal members, and that's going to stay pretty consistent unless the government creates more federal agencies dedicated to transportation, and who knows, they might, but it's not going to grow exponentially. But where CVSA grows, spreads our message and spreads the safety culture is, again, through those class 3 associate members, and we are very reliant upon them and grateful for them. as well. And a lot of our services, hopefully we'll have time to discuss it at the end today, but a lot of our services also are dedicated to our Class 3 members. I can't tell you how many folks I've helped out with data queues or helped out with crash preventability questions, or when they're issued citations. I'm with CVSA, and Class 1 members are our first Class 1 members, but important to CVSA is that we get it right. As an example, so many of you are probably familiar with, let's say, the Colorado crash, without getting into specifics of it. But an incident like that, when a prosecutor is investigating that, they need to understand the federal regulations. And for those of you in this industry, those are incredibly complex and difficult. And they need to have a resource. And oftentimes CVSA is that resource so they can make the correct charging decision, not the incorrect one, right? We don't want to prosecute somebody when a vehicle defect is legitimately that, some sort of act of God or something that was not that driver's fault. And conversely, though, if a driver does commit a driving behavior choice or error for rules of road, then that would be an appropriate citation. But we want to make sure those are done appropriately and consistently and uniformly. So we do a lot of active outreach to our associates and help them with different things as well.
So question on this one is, I know I'm glad to see the locals group growing a little bit. A lot of times industry will have challenges where they're getting stopped by a local municipal jurisdiction, right? That may not be CVSA certified, may not understand how things work. When they run into something like that, what would you suggest? Should they talk to the state? Should they, when they have a challenge there, what do you suggest there?
Yeah, that's another good question. So really probably even more important than voting and doing all that other stuff at CVSA meetings. When you come to our meetings, you get to know the folks, the members, the folks who were the captains like I was in Kansas. And so many of our things are done through those networking relationships, right? So come to the meetings, meet those folks, and you have a direct phone call to make. But if you don't have that opportunity, I know a lot of folks don't. I mean, that's a week that you've got to travel and then you got to meet folks and you got to meet the right person. On our CVSA website, we do have, and this is open to the public, you don't have to be a member, a contacts at the top header, and you select that contacts. And this is useful for two purposes. One, it has all the CVSA staff. So you can reach out directly to me and I can contact that agency on your behalf and help you make those connections, or even have a discussion with them on your behalf as well. Or you can get that lead agency's phone number. It has their name, their email, and reach out to them directly. One of the things that we've really worked hard on is to make sure that our members are responsive to industry when they're making those calls. Those are the two ways you can handle that. Now, as far as a local entity who is not certified to do inspections, if you're not familiar with how that works, to be able to complete an inspection, a commercial motor vehicle inspection that is uploaded to FMCSA, completed on an inspection form, you must be certified to the standards and CVSA operational policy 4. That is the law in the United States. That was adopted not in the most recent, but the Highway Transportation Bill just prior to this one, and FMCSA finally finalized that rule. So all the states have to be certified to what our standards are. However, all the inspectors rather, even FMCSA's inspectors. However, in states, if you're not doing an inspection that is a CVSA inspection uploadable to FMCSA, states do have their own inspection platforms and programs. What I mean by that is weight is not something that FMCSA collects on their data form. So anyone in the state of Kansas, for example, by our statute can enforce commercial motor vehicle weight. But most of them have a relationship with that lead jurisdiction. And that lead jurisdiction generally can exert influence if that other organization is doing something that is improper. Sorry, really long-winded. You asked a tough question, not an easy one.
Well, I'm from experience, those types of things happen out in the field, and a lot of times it's just people needing to know where to go to. Right?
Yeah,
they don't know where to start, and it's helpful to have that information as a resource.
So if that's really what we're talking about, I would say always feel free to start with CVSA. Always feel free to reach out to me. It's chris@cvsa.org, chris@cvsa.org. And I'll show you where that is on our website, but you can always reach out to us. And if we don't know the answer, we will certainly get you in touch with someone who does. I'll jump over to our regions next. I won't spend a lot of time here, but you can just take a look and see how those are broken up. Northeast, Southeast, Central, Western, and then Canada's our region 5. So everyone is broken up into their different regions. And so when I talk about everything being uniform, we do want that inspection to be uniform, but different jurisdictions do have different things that they may focus more on. For example, I can tell you certainly the Colorado focuses more on brakes on the eastern side of the state. They do that because, much like the crash I was talking about before, that was a brake failure. So when you're in somewhere with hilly and mountainous terrain, you're going to focus more on that. Kansas, we don't. As a matter of fact, we're so flat. And on our western part of our state, we've got like one tree and we try and rotate it around so everybody gets some shade once in a while throughout the year. We're just flat, nothing there. So you have some hills on the eastern side, but we don't have a lot of overheating braking issues where I'm at in Kansas at all. But what we do have are definitely some tremendous wind issues out west. So tumbleweeds are a real thing in Kansas, and they will jump out and get you when the wind is blowing hard. So there are some regional differences in what components they may focus a little bit more on in that 37-step procedure. And that's why, right? There's just different challenges in different areas of the country. In the Northeast, the roads aren't as wide, and they just, if we think about how the USA developed, right, from east to west, infrastructure got bigger as it went out west. That's why you can haul more out west. It developed later. On the east, it did not. And so it's a little smaller, a little tighter. All right, talk to you about our committees. We have a lot of them. We have Crash Data and Investigation Standards. I'm proud to say that I helped start that committee. We're doing a lot of good things there. We have our Crash class open and running. Right now, it's to law enforcement only. We do hope to bring that to industry soon, much like Carrie's industry course. Driver traffic enforcement, where we really talk about hours of service, commercial driver's licenses, endorsements, the drug and alcohol testing program, enforcement and industry modernization with ADS vehicles and all of the different technology out there today. We are trying to be a leader and innovator in how that technology comes to fruition and really where the rubber meets the road, literally in that example. Information systems, that's a committee that I'm also heavily involved in. And that's the data. What happens in the background? How do inspections get uploaded? What can you pull from that data? How can you sort that data? Where's it stored, located, and what you can do with it? Passenger carrier. I think they have been arguing about where to put an emergency exit sign on the same bus door for the last 3 meetings, but they're going at it strong, and I'm confident they will come to a resolution about where that sticker needs to go. Policy and regulatory affairs. So we do have quite a bit of outreach. We do it to industry, we do it to law enforcement. We don't do it much to the states, but we definitely do it to the federal government. And we do that on our members' behalf, both on the membership for the associates as well as law enforcement. We do like to try and get on the same page so we can do that as uniformly as a group through both those 2 memberships, although sometimes they do have differing opinions, but we also reach out to Congress. So as an example, talking about the standardization of the criteria to be certified to complete an inspection, that was something that CVSA was able to do legislatively. Size and weight, that's where we try and bring everybody together and make sure everyone's on the same page on size and weight issues throughout the United States. That one's a little different in that we stand fairly neutral on size and weight issues because there is such a difference between the western and eastern parts of the country based on that infrastructure that we just talked about. But we do bring everyone together to discuss the issues they're experiencing in their jurisdictions and the latest technology to measure weight appropriately. Of course, training, a very big issue at CVSA where we want to make sure that that training is uniform. What can we put up on our website for training for folks? And how do we maintain that over time? And they're generally responsible for our CVSA operational policy 4, which are the training criteria and guidelines. And then finally, vehicle. Where most of our out of service criteria is built around are issues that pop up in vehicle, whether it's different technologies, mechanical issues. So those are our committees. The next slide talks about our programs. Oops, I can see that I have an error in the title there. Sorry about that. This is CVSA programs rather than committees. And I won't read them all to you, but I put them all on there just so you'd have an idea of really how many things that CVSA really does. Road checks, one of them, Operation Safe Driver, which I used to head up, our brake safety weeks, our hazardous materials programs. We just do a lot of things to try and get that safety message out there and that uniformity message out there and work toward that goal. And one of the things that we are also very proud of is the International Driver Excellence Award program. And that is for those drivers out there who have spent a lifetime and a career of driving safely, and we recognize them every year at our annual conference. Next, our training and certification. So CVSA is responsible for the roadside CMV inspector certification. We do that through our operational policy 4. Our other operational policies, we'll talk about the data collection and how to do it. And we have Ops 15 that talks about what and where violations should go and how they should be listed or how they should be recorded on an inspection along with their out of service criteria. But we are responsible for inspector certification and those standards. North American standard, you may have heard that, just the NAS inspection procedures. That's a North American standard, and that's the 37-step procedure for a level 1. The first 13 or so are really driver related. So if we went to a level 3 inspection, which is a driver only inspection, really you'll just see the first 13 steps there. But for a full inspection that does everything driver and vehicle and the components to the best of our ability, that's going to be our level 1. The North American Standard Training Program, the CVSA Decal program. That's something that probably a great many of you care about. CVSA Decal, or Decal, if you're from Canada, denotes that your vehicle has passed a CVSA inspection and there were no critical defects. So you can have a defect, depending on what it is, as long as it's not on the critical violation list, and still receive a sticker. You can also have an inspection where you may think you've passed and didn't have any out of service violations and you don't get a sticker. That's because you may still have a critical defect. And those are found in what was Appendix G of FMCSA's regulations, and it's now Appendix A of FMCSA's regulations. We are responsible for the out of service criteria. And then of course, our outreach and education and policy development. Just wanted to read the last two, but I'm going to go back to the out of service criteria for just a second. I don't want to act like I just flew by the most important thing we probably do. So that out of service criteria, when you are roadside and you are placed out of service, whether that's a driver or a vehicle, or it can be an out of service because of the load. The out of service criteria was recently redefined, not redefined, but more specifically defined as a self-governing document, in that the vehicle and driver out of service are for imminent hazards. That's always kind of been how we would describe it, but it was never really formalized until this last year with a little bit better description of what that really means. So we took two definitions from the FMCSRs, but essentially an imminent hazard is anything that's likely to increase the probability of a collision for a driver or a vehicle. So let's say someone is suspended. If your driver's license has been suspended, it was probably for driving related behavior. You haven't taken that corrective action to make sure your driver's license wasn't suspended. You're shut down roadside. No US DOT number. You may wonder how that correlates to being more likely to be involved in a crash, but it turns out it does. The FMCSA brought us the statistics, and it was 6 or 7 times more likely to be involved in a crash if you do not have a US DOT number. You know, if we think that all the way through, having US DOT number means you're familiar with the regulations. Being familiar with the regulations means you're more likely to abide by them. If you abide by the regulations, you're less likely to be involved in a crash. So logically, if we follow that all the way through, FMCSA was able to produce the data for that, and sure enough. So everything in there is really designed to prevent a crash. Now, in the case of hazardous materials, that changes just a little bit. So when we talk about an imminent hazard with hazardous material, your placard being incorrect doesn't cause a crash. It's not a causal factor. But if you look at the hazardous materials definition of an imminent hazard, it also talks about the possibility of additional loss of life or damage to the environment should there be a hazardous materials spill. So there are actually a couple different definitions of what an imminent hazard is in the federal regulations, and we took those. And then so for the hazmat, it includes that additional damage to the environment should there be some sort of a spill. All right, our standard inspection program, North American Standard Inspection Program. As you can see there, we want to remove those unsafe vehicles, drivers from the roadways, and we want to be uniform in everything that we do. Direct attention to those rules and regulations, and document violations that might be used in subsequent enforcement actions. And they are. If FMCSA does an investigation, Steve, I think he used to do CRs when we called them that at one point. I was CR certified as well. Although I never did one, that's tough work. And you're going into a company and you're reviewing really everything in that company to make sure that they're a safe a company. I think you do some of that now to make sure the folks that work with you now are safe. Data collection, and we'll talk about that with road check, but that is an important part of what we do because FMCSA makes decisions based on what law enforcement finds roadside. So if they're not correctly documenting those violations, FMCSA is going to set policy based on things that are untrue, and that's going to be bad policy. So we've got to make sure the data that we collect is accurate, and we do that by making sure officers are trained, first of all. And then secondly, we can do that through technology. For example, the new inspection software that's coming out where it locks down violation codes. So you can't have an officer write you a violation that's non-existent or place you out of service for a violation that they can't place you out of service for. So some interesting changes. Yes, sir.
So question there, Chris, with the data side. So you talked a lot about what happens on the front end with the inspection so far. So what happens once the inspection is completed? And how is that used? And how does that impact on drivers and carriers?
Yes. So without getting crazy into the weeds, essentially it is transferred a couple of different ways. And if you really want the details on that, give me a call and we can walk through them. But it's transferred ultimately to FMCSA. It is stored in an antiquated database, and they're rebuilding that. Now, the new database is going to be pretty awesome in what it can provide to both the public and to law enforcement privately behind the seats. However, let's talk about what exists today. So today it exists in a platform called MCMS, and that is an old database that goes way back to TSA before FMCSA was ever created within DOT. And that database stores all of those inspections, and it has all the data on the carrier. So when you register and get your DOT number, that begins a profile that starts in MCMS. And then anything that happens associated with that DOT number after you get it is then associated with that forever, like a record. And that creates the record for the company. FMCSA takes the violations. They take them in different sets, whether it's a 5-year window, 3-year window, a 1-year window for current trends like we do for road check. And they look to see what the causal violations of crashes are. They look to see how many speeding they get or traffic enforcement. And I'll take traffic enforcement as the example. Over the last, my dog said hi, over the last however many years, that's gone down, right? And so one of the things we've seen at the same time of traffic enforcement going down, on the opposite end of it, we've seen crashes going up. Now, I don't want to make a causal connection yet there, but I'll make a correlative one, right? That it is an indicator of somewhere they need to look to determine whether or not they need to alter their focus. Here's what I mean. One of the ways FMCSA decided to alter their focus, even though they're primarily responsible for checking commercial motor vehicles, they allowed a higher percentage of that MCSAP money, the money they give to the states to inspect vehicles, to stop passenger vehicles around a commercial motor vehicle, because we looked at that data that was collected, and going clear back to large truck crash causal factor study done, or crash causation study done in 2003, it showed that most of the crashes are not caused by the commercial motor vehicle or its driver. So they freed up some of that money to do that. So as we talk about that data that's collected, when Congress, is how it works in the States, when Congress allocates that money to FMCSA, they do it based on what FMCSA tells them their priorities are. And those priorities come from that data from every single commercial motor vehicle stop completed in the US, and then those violations written down by those inspectors, either violations written down or a lack of violations if we have clean inspections. Okay, did I get it?
Yes.
Okay.
There's more to the story. There's more to the story, but I think you covered off on it good. Thanks.
Yeah. There's definitely more to that. There's people involved and there's policy involved too. So it can get a little more in depth, but that's generally what the goal of the data being used for. So here are different types of inspections. If you've ever wondered what in the heck when I see a different inspection. So the level 1 is the most stringent or most detailed, I would say. That's going to be your vehicle and your driver, the components, the brakes, all of it. That's what can result in the CVSA sticker. If for some reason they can't check enough of the brakes, that's a level 2. Level 3 is driver only. Level 4 are inspections where states have a special thing that they're looking to collect, or some sort of FMCSA special thing that they're looking to collect in a data collection purpose. The vehicle only is a level 5. It typically happens either in Mexico, if done by SCT, because they don't have the authority to inspect drivers, their National Guard does. Or it's going to be after a crash, typically. Could also be at a compliance review. I'm sure Steve's probably done some level 5s there where you don't have a driver handy, but you still need somebody to operate the controls, but they're not really driving the vehicle. Jurisdictional mandated. So that does not go to FMCSA. I'll use Kansas as the example. We have a state school bus inspection program. We could choose to complete that inspection on our FMCSA or third-party vendor inspection software to keep a record of it, but that does not go to FMCSA. And then our level 8, which has not been implemented yet, but ideally that would be an electronic inspection where you were not stopped necessarily, but an inspection was completed while you went by some sort of data collection point. All right. Our decal, we've talked a little bit about that, but if you get a decal, it means you passed and you had 0 defects in the 15 critical inspection items. They're good for up to 90 days. So by the color of the decal and which corner of that decal is ripped off, it lets the inspectors know which month it was given in. And then you get it for the next window quarter, the rest of that quarter. So if you get it in the first of the quarter, it's good for that entire quarter. If you happen to get it in the last couple of days, it's only going to be good for those last couple of days, but that means your vehicle is in good shape and you're really likely to get another one in that next quarter should you be stopped. And generally, and this matters here for road check too. And when we see that, most of the time those vehicles are waved on, and you can see there it says that there's no obvious defects that are apparent. So as long as you have that CVSA sticker and you're rolling through somewhere they're going to be completing road check, they're probably just going to wave you right on by, wave at you and say thank you for driving through. If you don't have the sticker, you're more likely to get inspected. But if they see something obvious, a load securement or some lights that have gone out or something that's happened, they may go ahead and inspect you at that point. Won't spend a ton of time here because I really want to get to the meat and what we're talking about and just kind of looking where the time is. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but they had those critical inspection items, and this is broken up into a couple of slides because there's a lot of them. And you'll find those critical inspection items. Let's say you have a brake that's a violation, but it's not an out of service because it doesn't meet the 20% threshold or criteria. It's still a violation. We still want to make sure folks know that they need to correct that violation. It will be listed on your inspection report. But then you wouldn't be eligible for a sticker because it's in the critical inspection item list. And you can see there, I won't read them all to you: cargo securement, coupling devices, driveline, drive shaft. But the ones I did read to you and the rest of them you can see on the screen there are obviously critical in that they're likely, if they are not functioning correctly, those components or parts to contribute to the likelihood of a crash. So that's why they are on that critical list. Here's the first slide, and then here is the second. One of the things we'll be talking about are going to be those wheel ends, which are wheels, rims, hubs, and tires listed there in the first column. Before I go on to our out of service criteria, do I have any questions from you guys or anyone?
One from me, actually, Chris. How often does the out of service criteria change? Is that reviewed regularly? Is it something that carriers should be continuously monitoring year to year as the different volumes are sort of put out?
Yeah. Another good question. Thank you for asking. So it does change every year. Now, some of those changes are small and not likely necessarily to affect a carrier. I would recommend, and if we have time today, I'll show you our app, but I would recommend getting that from CVSA. It does change every year. So we began reviewing it at our first workshop in April. We take issue requests all year long, and both from law enforcement saying, hey, I think this is right, or I think this is wrong. The same thing from industry. And then we vote on those action items. Typically, although we'll have some in the spring, many of them go through at our fall conference. And then they have to be voted on by our board of directors. And then there is a full vote of all of the membership lead jurisdiction, those 71 members. They're the ones who vote on the out of service criteria. But when I talk about it going into effect, the committees themselves, when we work on an industry, does have a vote there. Industry also has a vote in the board of directors meeting as well. But then when it goes out for the very final product, after it's gone through all the vetting that it does every year, then the lead agencies vote on it one more time. And so that's definitely something that you should get a copy of every year because it does change. And one of the things we really, I don't know what the right phrase is. I don't want to say harp on, but that's, I suppose, the way we do it is that we remind those inspectors every time that they're going to put a carrier out of service that they refer to that out of service criteria and they double check it. So when we're training them in class, hey guys, every time you're putting somebody out, you should go back and double check that it's meeting that out of service criteria, because it does change. And so I would say the same thing for industry out there. Make sure you have a copy of it. And no better way to challenge through a data queue, if you have one, than have the out of service criteria language right there, and you can insert it into your challenge, just like having a copy of the regulation and quoting what you think is the correct, what should have been the correct action. But yeah, changes every year. And you may be wondering, because it's not a regulation, you can see it there on the screen. It's an enforcement inspection guide. It's not a maintenance manual either. It just talks about what meets that threshold of an imminent hazard. So how in the world is that enforced, and how does it legally put people out of service roadside? Well, it is mentioned in the FMCSRs, and those are the regulations that FMCSA promulgates, specifically mentioned in their hazardous materials section. FMCSA, however, completes really few inspections. The lion's share of inspections in the state are done by state employees working underneath that federal grant. So the states adopt those regulations that FMCSA kicks out. Sometimes they do it through their own legislative process. Sometimes they do it through their administrative agency. They have a DOT in their own state or a different state agency that adopts them. And one of the things they'll also adopt is the out of service criteria. They can adopt it in full, they can adopt it in part, or they can use it as a guideline. So, and it's an industry standard, it's admissible in court under a treatise, a whole lot of different ways it gets in there. There's no smooth, easy, one size fits all explanation for how that's adopted in each state. But that is the reason that you're placed or can be placed out of service if you meet one of those criterias in the out of service criteria. Okay, I didn't freeze that time. I was just making sure you guys didn't have any questions. All right. So quick slide. And, really everything I've talked about with CVSA and leading up to it, we're really talking about that cooperation, that collaboration, those relationships, whether you're coming to our meetings, whether you're, emailing people back and forth and building those relationships, but those do save lives, right? They become integral in the process of making sure everyone has the same information and is performing that same inspection, and that they're doing it in a consistent and standardized way. So that's it for who CVSA is.
So as you can see, the CVSA is working hard to balance the enforcement objectives of the authorities and the needs and interests of the industry, which is probably where you sit. A big thanks to Chris Turner for breaking that down for us today. If you want to learn more about Whip Around and how we can help ensure greater compliance and safety through your fleet maintenance and inspections, you can go to whiparound.com, or you can click the link down in the description below. And hey, we want to hear from you, so don't forget to leave a comment. Leave us a question, tell us if you love the video, or even suggest something that you want to hear from us, something that you would like to learn about the industry at large. We'll see you soon.